Welcome to a new edition of Strategic Paths, a special series on the interconnectedness between Arab politics and global politics, as well as the regional shifting balance of power in the Middle East and North Africa. I invite you to click like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for future videos. My focus today is on the ongoing violence in Jerusalem and whether the US and UN calls for restraint are enough to prevent further escalation. If not, is it an early indicator of a possible third intifada? Rubber bullets, stun grenades, arrests, state violence, and hundreds of injuries are the new game in town around the Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. There has been growing escalation between the Israeli army and Palestinian protesters over a possible eviction of 300 Palestinians from homes they lived in for more than 50 years in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in East Jerusalem. The Israeli Supreme Court, which was supposed to hold a hearing on Monday, said it was cancelled at the request of the State Attorney General. The United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said the law is applied in an inherently discriminatory manner, adding that the transfer of Israeli civilians onto occupied land could be prohibited under international humanitarian law and may amount to a war crime. In the Vatican, Pope Francis has called for peace and a shared solution to the violence. So, what is at stake now, and how far the standoff adds to the dynamics of a complex conflict? Two narratives have been at a collision. The Israeli Foreign Ministry called the situation in Sheikh Jarrah a real estate dispute. This description can be a minimalist interpretation of a deep-rooted causality of the conflict. In contrast, Palestinian leaders and institutions, including the Palestine National Council, have described the anticipated evictions as ethnic cleansing aimed at Judaizing the holy city. However, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed his government shall not allow any radical element to undermine the calm in the city. In Gaza, leader of Hamas Ismail Haniyeh asserted the resistance is ready and motivated and will not stand idly by. Hamas has been reported to have fired 7 rockets at Jerusalem and dozens more at the southern parts of Israel on Monday evening. One commentator in the Jerusalem Post called it to the tinderbox that is Jerusalem has burst into flames. A clear indicator that Israel and Hamas are not opting for a de-escalation approach at this point. It also showcases how Netanyahu maintains his confidence in the Israel-US alliance and Washington's non-condemnation of his use of excessive force. If we consider this open-ended cycle of violence in Jerusalem an early warning system of the trajectory of the deepening conflict, I foresee 3 main political trends. First, this new crisis in the Israeli-Palestinian protracted conflict represents a first test for the Biden administration Middle East policy. President Biden has vowed to restore the credibility of the United States and depart from Trump's controversial political legacy. And like Trump, Biden has shown firm desire to fulfill the strategic objectives of the United States, not necessarily those of Israel. His pragmatic political worldview also includes the advocacy of democratic reforms and the respect of human rights, among other calls for moral politics towards Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia. The notion of the United States acting as a peace broker for decades was marred by a personal and political collusion between Trump and Netanyahu for 4 years. Now, there is a split of opinions between progressive Democrats and moderate Democrats over the real benefits of siding with the Likud party policies. The Bernie Sanders and the Elizabeth Warrens of the Democratic Party are against Netanyahu's iron fist policy and have raised alarms about those they call Israeli extremists. Senator Sanders has argued the United States must speak out strongly against the violence by government-allied Israeli extremists and make clear the evictions of Palestinian families must not go forward. Now, Washington and Tel Aviv don't see eye to eye on the Iran policy and the would-be resumption of the Iranian nuclear agreement as a potential outcome of the ongoing Vienna talks. But the White House doesn't seem to be interested in spending much political capital or time on the crisis of Jerusalem. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan expressed concerns during a phone call with his Israeli counterpart Meir Ben-Shabbat. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the rockets attacks from Gaza should stop immediately and urged all sides to take steps to reduce tensions. However, Israeli officials have argued the Biden administration should not intervene over the recent escalation. If the Biden administration is sincere about restoring the credibility of the United States, it should exercise maximum pressure on leaders of both Israel and Hamas. The progressive leaders of the Democratic Party in Washington are keen on adopting a balanced policy vis-à-vis all sides. Biden and Blinken may have to appoint a new U.S. envoy to the Middle East and revive the stalled peace process. My second point addresses how Netanyahu's harsh decision has embarrassed Arab states that have joined the Abraham Accords and normalized relations with Israel. The fallacy of the promise of the Oslo Accord signed in 1993 has shifted into another mirage of peace by the Abraham Accord signed 27 years later. With various incentives, Arab states like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco have capitalized on the Abraham Accords as a political transition toward peacemaking between Palestinians and Israelis. These Arab governments are now contained by the Accords and remain hesitant about declaring a position of condemnation against Netanyahu. In other words, their tongues are tied not to criticize Israel. They are embarrassed by the high level of popular resentment and outcry for justice for the victims of the upcoming evictions. For example, Moroccan authorities have banned demonstrators from protesting in Rabat and Casablanca. There is also increasing popular skepticism in the real value of normalizing with Israel. There is deepening gap between state and society amidst other heated debates of several controversial regional crises. My third and last point has more significance in terms of the trajectory of the current escalation. There is fading hope in both Oslo Accord and Abraham Accords, and a mixture of nationalistic, religious, political, and strategic drivers of the current standoff. Netanyahu may engage in a wider scope of armed confrontation and remains committed to the idea of preventing an American-Iranian return to the nuclear agreement. He may engage military force once again as one of the possible distractions in front of the Biden administration. In short, the standoff in Jerusalem ushers to a possible third intifada. Some critics of Netanyahu's policy argue all the ingredients are there. Some European activists have called it colonial violence and colonial oppression. This is the constant driver of the original conflict in the Middle East. Please include your comments and suggestions below, and I invite you once again to click like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for future videos. Till we meet next time, goodbye for now.